Welcome to Data Ethics Professional Webinar number 13. Today we are joined by Corinne Russell, Data Ethics Lead for Police Scotland. So we've got a really exciting session planned today. Thank you so much, Corinne, for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. And I can see lots of people are trickling in. So hi, everyone. If you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat, we would love to see where you're from geographically, what organization you're from. I know we've got a really nice mix today of people from different sectors who are looking at how to build an ethical data culture. And we've also got a lot of people from the sort of criminal justice space. So really interested to hear where you're from. Say hi while we wait for everyone to trickle in. In the meantime, I'll just introduce Corinne a little bit. She'll tell you a little more about herself in a minute, but she's the data ethics lead for Police Scotland. She's got a long history of working for the police in different roles. So she's got a really useful perspective on the way that data is used from in different roles and from different angles. So you'll get a chance to ask her questions about that if you're from police department or similar sort of law enforcement kind of sector. She's also got a lot of experience developing this data ethics triage system that they have at Police Scotland. So it'll be like one of the things I was really impressed with. I was so excited to get a preview of this webinar, beforehand. We always practice, make sure all the slides work and things. So last week or the week before, I was just really impressed by how much work Police Scotland have put into making it really transparent and really sort of embedded in the communities that are impacted by the data projects and sort of seeking their viewpoints and things. So if anybody's working on a project that they're thinking about how are we going to get stakeholders' viewpoints, I think that'll be really interesting to hear from Corinne as well. Just having a look at all the people that are joining us today. Thank you so much, everyone. Looks like lots of people from different sort of police and emergency services. So welcome.
Yep, it's nice to see people from the emergency services here. Hello, welcome. And hi, Alana. That's Alana and my team just joined.
Excellent. Right, I think with that, we're at 3 minutes past. Let's get started. So Corinne, I'll just turn it right over to you if you want to get started and just let me know when you want me to change the slides.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Kay. So hopefully everyone can hear me okay. As Kay said, I'm the data ethics lead at Police Scotland, and I'm going to speak for a bit today about really our journey with data ethics so far and how we implemented our framework and embedded data ethics into our wider organisational culture. I will start off by saying that Police Scotland was actually the first police force in the UK to have its own data ethics framework and data ethics function. So I suppose that came with both advantages and disadvantages in the sense that we were free to really do whatever we wanted and establish a process that really worked for us and was tailored to our specific needs as an organisation. But going first also means that you are really testing some of these processes for the first time. So it has involved a little bit of trial and error along the way. So we've kind of learned as we've gone along and tried to refine our processes to get them as effective as they possibly can be. So if Kay, you wouldn't mind going on to the next slide, I will just start at the beginning. So our journey with data ethics really began back in 2020, which was when we published our joint strategy for policing. And in that document, we set out an ambition to become an organisation driven by effective and efficient use of data in an ethical way. That was linked to a specific public confidence outcome in that strategy. And in order to achieve that outcome, we needed to embed ethical and privacy considerations into everything that we did. So that then led to our data ethics framework being created in 2021. And that is essentially, the link will be in the chat to that original document, but it's really practical guidance for anyone to use in Police Scotland to identify and address ethical challenges, particularly centered around our use of data and technology. And it also just sets out what good governance should look like in policing. We created our framework in partnership with the Responsible Data and AI team, who are part of the UK government. And it's in that framework we kind of specify that we are an advisory function only. So we differ from other similar functions such as data protection, for instance, that's linked to specific legislation and regulations. Our role is really there just to provide advice on what the key ethical considerations are, and our advice is provided to whoever the senior responsible owner of a new project is, and it's then for them to make an informed decision really about how to proceed, you know, and make that kind of operational level decision. So our main function within the data ethics team in Police Scotland is really to build public confidence and confidence amongst our key stakeholders as well. So we're situated in the Chief Data Office, so we absolutely support innovation and use of new technology to improve ways of working. However, we just need to make sure that we do innovate in a responsible manner that, you know, ensures public confidence around what we're doing. So the first thing that we implemented and concentrated on getting up and running from our framework was our data ethics triage process. And this is the process that we follow at the onset of a new project or initiative to identify what the areas of highest risk might be and what kind of ethical aspects we need to consider throughout. I will explain that process in a bit more detail on the next slide, but it's been live now since early 2022. And as I said at the beginning, we have kind of continued to refine our processes as we go. So if something's maybe not quite working as well as it could be, we will just change it and try again. So it's quite freeing, really, to be honest. So the main focus of our team is on data-driven technology. And for Police Scotland, that means anything to do with AI, anything that processes a large amount of biometrics data, cyber and digital forensics, and really just any kind of large-scale processing of data to aid decision making. So it's things like that that we are aligned to. If we can go to the next slide, please, Kay. Sorry. Okay, so this is our data ethics triage approach that we follow. So it consists of 11 questions because we want it to be as simple and straightforward as possible. And while I just said that we continue to refine our processes as we go, these 11 questions are an example of something that hasn't changed from the very beginning, because we have found that they just work so well for us and they, you know, they do the job. There's no need to change them. So whenever a new project or a business area that wants to use a new piece of technology approaches us, we will work through these 11 questions with them. So at first they will self-assess the answers to each question, and we get basically a risk grading for each one, which ranges from high, medium or low risk. We do have guidance notes to explain what is high, medium and low risk for each question, and they are in that framework document that's been shared if anyone's particularly interested in looking at what that guidance is. So we will work with the project or the business area on this, and because we set up this process and we didn't want it to be viewed as just another tick the box exercise or, you know, just filling in a form, we will also meet with them and discuss all of the answers to the questions. You know, we'll really try and understand what they're looking to achieve, and vice versa, discuss what the main ethical considerations are with them so that they're aware. And we find that that just really helps kind of enable the process a lot more efficiently, and it's really just sort of stimulating a meaningful conversation about ethics as well. So we find that that approach works really well for us. So the 11 questions themselves then, as I said, they're designed to be as simple as possible and, you know, as the least questions possible as well. But we did also ensure that they covered quite a wide range of different areas. So we start off with the first 4 questions here, and they cover just the general scale of the project. So how large in scale is it? How many people is it potentially going to impact? So low risk for that would be something like an internal only project that's not going to impact the public, whereas high risk would be something that's going to impact, you know, members of the public on a national level and will actually impact them directly in how they experience the police or interact with them. Question 2, does the project signify a major step change in our current capabilities? So high risk again being a major step change, low risk being not much of a change at all. Question 3 is quite important when it comes to using things like AI, because it asks about where human decision making sits within the project. You know, where does the human in the loop come in? What is the decision making process that is followed? Question 4 asks about how novel the project is. You know, is it potentially something that other police forces in the UK have been using for several years already? So that would be low risk. Or has no one ever attempted something like this before? So it's high risk. We then ask 3 questions about the data more specifically. So what type of data is required and how sensitive is it? Question 6 asks about data quality. And to be honest, this question probably has to do quite a bit of heavy lifting, because we're not only looking at the data that's the input there and how high quality that is, but we're also looking at the output. So for instance, if an AI model is generating an output, how effective is it? You know, what's the performance? And what's the training data that it's been exposed to? What's the quality of that? Does it apply to the live environment? So yeah, many things under that, just one question 6, I would say. And finally, a question about data sharing with other organizations. We then have a couple of questions on what the outcomes and effects are. So how intrusive are they? What's the potential for encroachment on civil liberties and privacy? And the last couple of questions here are to do with proportionality. So are the objectives of this project, have they raised concerns in the past? And the final question asks if certain groups could potentially be affected more than others. And that question is really where we're teasing out things like bias in the data set. So after all of that, after we've assessed each individual question, we will conclude our triage process with an overall result. And rather than going with, you know, high, medium or low risk, what we do is we just close it as no further scrutiny is required, or the other possible outcome is further scrutiny is required. And we would then take the project through the further steps of our process, which I'll explain a bit more on the next slide. I will say that these questions, they don't have a specific scoring threshold or anything as to, you know, when something will require further scrutiny or not. It's not like you get 3 high risks and 1 medium and you're automatically referred for further scrutiny. It's there accompanied by meaningful conversation to really fully examine the context of the use case and how far risks can be mitigated. It's not prescriptive in that way. So we have found that this triage process has worked really well for us in the few years that we've used it. I think we're up to about 50 projects that we've taken through this process so far, and so far only 1 has actually been referred for further scrutiny. So I think that really speaks to how robust this triage is in identifying the risks and mitigating them from a very early stage without having to involve the further steps at all. Okay, so if we move on to the next slide. Thank you. So I think if everything I've spoken about so far is phase 1 of the implementation of our framework, then the rights-based pathway would be classed as phase 2, because this is something that came along later based on what we learned from really the first year of implementation. When the data ethics function was first established, we were specifically aligned to our change project portfolio only. So some organizations might call them transformation projects. It's basically the big, large-scale projects that are led by a project manager and supported by our portfolio management office. So they're the ones that are going to be introducing major change to an organization on a national level, usually. So for us, something that would fall into that category would be something like the national rollout of body-worn video cameras, for example. But we recognised quite early on that that was quite limiting, aligning ourselves to those projects only. The original thinking was that that was where most of the technology would be coming from, but it transpired there's actually a lot of activity that goes on across Police Scotland that isn't necessarily elevated to change project status. It might be just, you know, one department wants to use a new piece of software, but nevertheless, because we are such a high stakes environment, it would still benefit from the same level of assurance around ethics. So one of the first things we did was start to expand our referral criteria to allow, you know, others to benefit from our process. And this is how the rights-based pathway was established. So it was really there to just fill the gaps and really formalize the public and stakeholder engagement aspects of everything that we do, so that there's a set process to follow and it's consistently applied across the board. So anyone in Police Scotland who wants to introduce new technology, new data-driven technology, should I say, follows this. I won't go into each of these steps in a huge amount of detail because we can maybe just save those for the Q&A session afterwards if anyone's particularly interested in one step. But we start off with the data ethics triage process that I've just described. And for the projects that are identified as requiring further scrutiny from that, they would then proceed through steps 2, 3, and 4 here as required. So step 2 is where we consider whether any kind of public engagement might be required around what we're looking to do. And that would take place prior to deployment of the technology. At this point, we also engage with a number of different stakeholders across Police Scotland, depending on what the context is and, you know, who needs to be involved. There's, you know, the list is quite endless, to be honest, but I can explain a bit more about that if anyone's specifically interested in stakeholder engagement. Step 3 here is really the first port of call for projects that require further scrutiny, and that is our internal data ethics oversight group. That group is it's made up of subject matter experts from different areas of Police Scotland, and it's really there to just give a wider internal perspective on a certain project. So they will just offer further advice and challenge and ultimately recommendations on how to then proceed through the rest of the rights-based pathway. Step 4 here is external scrutiny. However, we're still in the process of establishing that group. So what we want to have is an independent data ethics group, which is going to be made up of members from outside of policing. Something that policing has been criticised for in the past is not having enough external oversight over our use of technology. So having a group like that will be incredibly useful when it comes to the, you know, the higher risk projects, something that's going to impact a lot of people, and, you know, maybe something that's been the topic of widespread debate in the past, just to have that external view and advice. So after all that, step 5 is really just there to signify what I said earlier about how our advice from all of this process is then just fed back to whoever the senior owner is, or there might be a governance board that's leading on the project, and it's for them to then make a decision as to how to proceed and whether to ultimately start using the technology or the data or whatever it is. And finally, the last stage of the rights-based pathway involves a post-deployment review. So we recognize that you can do a really robust assessment at the beginning of a project, but once something starts to be used in a live environment, things can potentially change. It might not work as effectively as we first thought it would. There might be new use cases identified. So what we will do is we will go back maybe 6 months to a year after concluding the original triage and just check in and do an evaluation. And that is really just there to make sure that there's been no unintended consequences that we maybe didn't anticipate at the beginning, following actual live use. So that is the rights-based pathway. And on the next slide, if you wouldn't mind skipping over, Kay. Oh, sorry, it's the one before that. Thank you. This is an actual case study that I wanted to talk about to kind of demonstrate how the rights-based pathway works in practice. So this is BriefCam. BriefCam is CCTV object recognition technology, which uses algorithms to identify people and vehicles based on things like clothing type and color. You can also search for a specific gender of person as well, and there's other categories like someone carrying a bag, for example. It will filter that out as well. So the main use case within law enforcement for this type of technology would be something like needing to locate a high-risk missing person, for example, or a suspect at large. And it's really just there to cut down the manual trawl of hours and hours of CCTV footage in a high-stakes situation where time is of the essence. This will just help to filter the results down and then present them to a human to review and check if it's the person that we're looking for. It's worth noting that BriefCam is capable of doing facial recognition as well. However, that has been disabled at a system level for us, and we will not be using that. So we did a data ethics triage for BriefCam, and this identified a high risk around that data quality question. This was mainly because there was very limited evidence provided on how accurate the algorithm was and how well it performed. So we proceeded to step 2 of the rights-based pathway there, and we did a public engagement survey just to kind of gather views on our use of this type of technology. We received largely positive feedback. So we were then able to proceed to the data ethics oversight group. And that group was presented with the evidence that we had managed to gather on the accuracy testing. And they provided further advice, discussed it at length, and eventually just provided recommendations to start a short pilot for BriefCam, whilst continuing to monitor accuracy issues as we go and then reporting back. So if we go to the next slide, please, Kate. Thank you. This is just a good example that I wanted to throw in of how I think we've managed to embed ethics in our organisational culture following the work that we've built over the past few years. Police Scotland has recently started a national conversation on the potential use of live facial recognition in Scotland. And you'll see there's a document there in the chat if anyone wants to read more about this. So I think this is an example of something that we've recognised has been a topic of fairly heated debate in the past few years and is likely to, garner a lot of public interest. So While we have the rights-based pathway process and it's very robust, for something like this, we recognise that there is a need to go even further than that and actually put public engagement at the forefront before we even make a decision as to whether we want to use this technology or not. So for this, we actually started off by doing a public engagement survey first, and we've also held various focus groups with different kind of specific representatives, diversity organizations, human rights organizations, just to kind of gather their views. And then this will all be collated and it will be used to kind of inform if we did want to introduce live facial recognition in Scotland, how might we go about it, and you know what's going to be the most acceptable way of doing it. So this isn't even a data ethics led initiative, to be honest. It's led on an organizational level within Police Scotland, and it's being carried out as a kind of tripartite initiative with the Scottish Police Authority and the Biometrics Commissioner as well. So we will just continue to support that as things develop. And I think I'm just on the final slide now, if we wouldn't mind flicking over. Thank you. So I just wanted to finish off by talking about the future, basically. So that's everything that we've done so far, but there are still some areas of work that we want to improve upon. You know, there's still some gaps in our processes that we maybe haven't been able to test properly yet, because as I said, we've only really taken that one case study for further scrutiny through the whole process. So one of the main priorities at the moment is to refresh our data ethics framework. It was originally published back in 2021, so it is a little bit out of date. It doesn't mention anything about the rights-based pathway. So we really want to get that published somewhere in the near future as a refreshed version. We also need to establish the independent advisory group, as I said earlier. It's really important to have that in place, you know, particularly as, you know, more and more things like AI become more commonplace. And finally, we have just started looking at our wider organizational AI governance as well. So one of the things that we've kind of been thinking about over the past year or so is that our processes are really good at the start to assess something, and then we have the post-deployment review as well, but it's the in-between. And with something like AI, you really need to have something in place to ensure that someone has ownership and accountability of all the risks that are involved with AI throughout the entire life cycle. So that is the next thing that we really want to build upon. Don't know exactly how it's going to work yet, to be honest, but it's something that we're certainly starting to think about and wanting to formalize so that, you know, we don't make any mistakes moving forward, or if we do, there's an opportunity to address them and a process there. So I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about in the main presentation anyway. I will just, you know, thanks everyone for listening, and I'll hand back over to Kate. Thank you.
Oh, that was fabulous. Thank you so much, Corinne. It's so interesting. I've scribbled down a bunch of questions here as you were talking. And I can see we've got lots of questions in the Q&A box as well. So I'll start to go through those. I actually like the fact that they're sort of in like chronological order and sort of go along with what like the order in which you talked. So I'll try and do that. And I think, you know, we can just start to have the discussion there. If anybody has any further follow-up questions, feel free to keep adding to the Q&A. So we'll get through as many as we can. We've got a good chance for discussion now. So the first question was from Paula. She said, how do you identify data projects that need to complete the triage process? So are there any that don't, or just literally every data-driven project now sort of have that happen? And I think Amy asked, sort of similar to Paula's question, looks like a great process. How is it embedded into the wider project development process? So is there kind of something in the wider project process where you're saying, have you spoken to the data ethics team, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so it's kind of there's a few different ways that we go about embedding this. So we do have our referral criteria, and we've published that internally so that everyone's aware of who needs to contact us. Separately to that, because we were originally set up as part of the change project function, they do have set guidance for all of their project managers to engage with us at specific stage gates. So when a project moves to initial business case, for example, that's when they first need to engage with us. And then there'll be touch points beyond that. So that is very formalized. It's the stuff that's kind of classed as business as usual that's a bit more ad hoc, because I suppose we want our process to be quite flexible as well according to the risk level. So what we do in that space to make sure that people know to come to us is basically just stakeholder engagement. So I attend a meeting with our digital division every month, for example. So that's one way of becoming aware of new projects that we need to triage. We also regularly engage with our colleagues in information assurance who are working on DPIAs, because the majority of the time, if a data ethics is needed for something, it'll be a DPIA as well. So it's just a combination of different things, just really talking to each other. I would say it's as simple as that. Hopefully nothing really slips through the cracks with that approach, but I suppose it's always possible.
Along the lines of DPIAs, I saw Craig asked a question: how do you link these triage questions in with DPIA and AI assessment questions and processes? Because I think it's quite interesting, because it's like an overlapping Venn diagram, isn't it? Where it's not just about compliance, it's sort of broader than compliance. And sometimes you have ethical risks that don't involve personal data. I wonder if you have any sort of further thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, there is undoubtedly some overlap, I would say, but I think we do try and remain quite separate processes whilst still linking in with each other on kind of common issues. I think, the main reason being is that we are essentially looking for an overall different outcome, and we're an advisory function. We don't have to, work through as much legislation as the DPIAs do to get to a go or no-go decision. So yeah, I would say we just kind of are mindful of what issues we're working on that will also impact the DPIA, and make sure that we get them to the right people, essentially.
Really interesting. I mean, that sort of joined up thinking, like, lack of silos sounds like so key.
Yeah.
Now
I would add, sorry, that it also helps that I came from a DPIA background before this role, so I kind of know the team and I know what kind of things they'll be looking for, so that helps.
Now, Andy asked a question that I think we hear a lot. Like, anytime I'm ever talking to any organization about this sort of thing, this question comes up. So he's asked, from a user perspective, how clear is it that your role is to enable safe and timely delivery, not to add friction through process or questioning? Because obviously, this is one of the things that comes up a lot with data ethics, like, oh God, another assessment, another checklist.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would say that from the very beginning of our team being established, we have absolutely stressed the fact that our function is there as an enabler rather than just being an additional layer of governance. And that I suppose there might be that initial perception that you're just doing things for the sake of it, but that's part of the reason that we approach everything in that meaningful conversation way, to show exactly why data ethics is important. I think it's been very useful for us, because in the early days we had a few kind of good successes of projects that we worked on, and we were actually able to enable the use of technology that Police Scotland had previously been afraid to use because of the risk involved, whereas having that data ethics assurance really helped us to start using them. So I think that helped sell it as a worthy process. And it also came along at a time after Police Scotland underwent quite a significant amount of negative scrutiny which you can read about in the press a few years ago for the way that we introduced our cyber kiosks technology. I won't go into that in any great detail, but basically it wasn't really the technology that was the concern. It was the way that we went about introducing it and the fact that we weren't transparent enough about it. So I think data ethics was really pitched as a way of learning from those mistakes and addressing them so that they don't happen again, which is something that, especially in policing, everyone is always keen to do. So I really do think we've benefited from coming in at the right time and just taking a practical approach to things, really. You know, how I said how we do a holistic assessment of the specific context and work through it, you know, with the project involved as much as they can be. It's not just, you know, an email back and forth. You know, you get to actually see a face and speak to a person. So I think that all helps. Yeah. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer.
That's a really good answer, though. And I think it links to what you were saying earlier about building confidence, that was like the reason why you sort of started this whole thing. And it's interesting to think about because obviously you want the general public to have confidence that the police are doing the right thing. You want the police to be earning that confidence by actually making sure that those mitigations are in place before something bad happens. But it's interesting to hear that it sounds like it's actually internal confidence as well. Like, okay, we have actually covered all the bases. We've thought about what those risks could be. We've mitigated them in advance. We're not accidentally going to do bad things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things about all of this is the transparency side of things and demonstrating accountability. So I think one of the favorite quotes that I learned on my data ethics professional course actually was about, you know, the end goal of data ethics is not to achieve unanimous agreement, because you're never going to do that. You're never going to get full unanimous agreement with all perspectives. But as long as you can demonstrate that you've carefully considered all of these ethical considerations and different perspectives and arrive at a defensible rationale, you know, that's half the battle. And I think that really helps with the public confidence aspect. As a law enforcement agency, public confidence is really key to everything that we do. We need to achieve a certain level of public confidence to maintain our legitimacy at the end of the day. So that is really why, that's how that whole rights-based pathway came about, to kind of just make sure that we involved as many different perspectives as possible.
Speaking of different perspectives, I want to come back to Amy's question now in the chat. She's asked, do you work with your EDI team on question 11? I can't remember what question 11 is, but that's probably the one about the one that addresses data bias, and is it going to impact different groups more than others?
Yes, so that is another kind of governance process that goes on in tandem with ours. So we would just be, I suppose, dependent on dealing with the business area that we're working with on the triage to make sure that anything that we identified was covered in the equality and human rights assessment and vice versa. So yes, we would just, again, it's completely context specific who we involve in different discussions, and like both internally and externally.
Yeah, makes sense. Another question here is, have you done any retrospective reviews yet? You know, how's that process worked? Have you any further detail you can give us on that?
Now, we did make the decision not to kind of go back and look at things, but that had already been introduced. But I wouldn't completely rule it out, to be honest, if there was something that, you know, would benefit from a data ethics assessment. I suppose that the whole point of our process, though, is to make a decision prior to deployment. So what would you do if we if the advice was not to use the technology, but we're already using it, is the problem. But we have, I suppose we've kind of done that in that we've gone back and looked at projects that have already been implemented, but then maybe looking to do something slightly different or introduce a new component, and we've examined them in that way. So I suppose following that logic, then anything major might eventually come to us at some point. Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Another interesting question here from Tim. Are there any discussions or plans for Police Scotland to deposit some of their data within trusted research environments, e.g. as the four Welsh police forces are proposing to do? I know, it's not something you've covered in this talk, but is that anything you can comment on here?
Um, I'm not aware of any plans to do that. However, I do know that we want to really work on greater transparency more generally in terms of proactive disclosure of things. I think it's been more important for us as we've been implementing our data ethics framework to get the actual processes up and running and working effectively. So things like one of our ambitions was to have some sort of public register of the technology we use, for example. So that's like proactive disclosure rather than reactive. And so, but that was just really, it's kind of, I think the processes have to be set up before we start looking at those things, but it is something we want to work on in the future. But hopefully by the live facial recognition example that I showed you, I think that shows that when it's something that's deemed to be quite high risk and of extreme public interest, then that is when we will put transparency first from the outset. But yes, there's definite value in having more open data, I would say, and I definitely wouldn't rule that out because I think we absolutely see the value of that as well.
That was making me think about FOIs. I don't know, have you had any experience with FOIs around these projects? Has this triage process kind of helped make some of that information available, or is that not something that's arisen yet?
But yeah, we have had quite a few, to be honest, FOI requests, which is one of the reasons that we want to move to a more proactive position so that it cuts down on the work that's required to reply to those individually. It just, makes more practical sense. But to be honest, most of our FOIs over recent years have been centered around AI. So data ethics is obviously one of the main responses to how we govern that. So it does come in quite a lot, and that's when we disclose our framework and everything and explain what we do.
I feel like that's the kind of thing that, if anybody's listening here who's in the process of trying to get this started in their organization, that's the kind of thing that often sells it to management in a way, is like, look, we're already like we're already struggling to earn that trust or to make sure that people see why we deserve the trust. This is a nice way to do it. If we have these frameworks in place, we don't have to worry about what we're going to have to disclose in an FOI because we know we've given the thought to what we need to mitigate in advance.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think as well, if you can link any type of governance to AI at the moment as well, that will get senior leadership buy-in because everyone wants to use AI. Everyone wants to use it to introduce more efficient ways of working, especially at the moment. So if you pitch something as helping an organization become AI ready, I think that helps it land a lot as well. Yeah, most definitely. But yeah, for us, as I said before, the main reason that we got senior buy-in kind of happened by accident as a result of all that negative scrutiny. So the Scottish government actually commissioned an independent group on emerging technologies in policing. And you can read their final report online. Actually, it's a pretty good one. So as part of that, they basically examined the way that we'd introduced technology in the past and made some recommendations for improvement. And that whole situation was really what led to the data ethics function being established. So I would say if any organizations are struggling to get senior buy-in, then it's good to have like a specific mistake or a lesson learned that you can point to show exactly why this is important.
Yeah, and in an ideal world, of course, they would anticipate that, but sometimes that's what it takes to make the point. Along those lines, I think this is an opportunity for you to toot your own horn a little bit here. It says, are you working with any other police forces to knowledge share and or establish a consistent ethical approach across policing in the UK? You've had some recognition around this, haven't you?
Yeah, so Police Scotland have been recognised by the National Police Chiefs Council as kind of leading the way on ethics, given that we were the first force to actually do it. So our framework has been shared with a lot of different police forces, including the NPCC as well, as kind of national best practice, really. And separately, we have set up a kind of just a data ethics group with the different police forces, which, I mean, there's not many data ethics leads in many of the police forces in the UK, but you know, the few of us that we meet regularly to kind of exchange best practice as well, and talk through kind of common issues, common initiatives. So that works really well to kind of get that joined up approach.
That's really, speaking of joined up approaches, this is tangentially related. So a question from Ed here in the chat. He's asked, do you consider the cumulative effects of the use of technology or data, or do you consider them as isolated projects? Now I'm going to follow up on that because Ed is another one of our certified data ethics professionals, and he actually did his case study for the certification on looking at things like if you have OASIS, for example, the offender assessment system that assesses people a certain way, the data that comes out of that system then might feed into another system later on. So, you know, is there any capacity for sort of looking at these streams of data as they go from sort of one system to another? If we're getting a biased output of one, could we end up with a biased result from the next one, even if that second one is sort of maybe not as biased as the first or something?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And Ed, you might actually be interested, if you're not aware of it already. There is actually an academic research project going on at the moment led by Professor Marion Oswald, which is called Probable Futures, and that is looking at that exact thing. So the chaining of AI systems in the criminal justice system and what impact that potentially has. So would recommend having a look at that stuff. We actually support that academic research project as well, and it's been producing some pretty good findings. For us, I would say that when we're assessing a new triage, it's definitely something that we consider, particularly because we've already identified that we have that gap around our wider organizational AI governance. And that's one of the ambitions of that, to set out, you know, who's controlling what the priorities are with AI systems and how do they link in with each other. Is there potential for duplication? Because that's not only a financial risk, it's a risk of getting skewed results and contradicting results. So I do understand what you mean, and I would say if we're assessing an individual triage, it's the same people that assess everyone. So we are aware of other similar systems that have already been through the process. We would most definitely ask, are you aware that this is also going on? And there's the potential for conflict or that kind of chaining effect where we've got AI results potentially feeding more AI results. Yeah, good question.
Really highlights the importance of having you and your team, some people with some sort of longitudinal expertise around this. I know one of the things I've heard from other organizations, you know, when there is, for example, a data ethics committee, when there's a self-assessment process happening, like your triage, where the initial assessment is a self-assessment, there's been concerns raised by the data ethics committees, like, well, what if they aren't even, like, they don't even know what they don't know? So they think it's fine. They've self-assessed it as safe or low risk, but actually we, with our wider perspective, might see a risk they don't. And how do we make sure that we're actually seeing all the things we need to see? Because what if it's self-assessed and then we never get a look in? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it is quite difficult. I think it's probably only going to be more difficult as we start to use more and more AI, because you can now get things like AI just embedded in systems, and maybe systems that we're already using. So it's like, how do we become aware of those things where it's maybe just an upgrade has suddenly introduced something new? But yeah, I think this is all just calling for more robust AI governance around our existing processes, isn't it? To make sure that I think it's really just about devolving the responsibility to a certain extent to the actual users and their leadership teams, so that they know exactly what their responsibilities are with technology such as this and data more widely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Another question in the chat that sort of popped up just now and is quite related, I think. You mentioned there aren't many data ethics leads in the police forces. Is that a concerning gap, and are more on the way or not?
Oh, I think there definitely will be more on the way. Yeah, I think it's just still quite a new area. I mean, as you saw, we only started in 2021. Data ethics lead was appointed at the start of 2022. So that is still a relatively short space of time. And then just in those few years, there's been a few people appointed in different forces, and they might not necessarily have data ethics in their title, but some of them just work it through maybe their wider data office or the data protection team, and just build that into that process instead. But it's definitely, it's something that the NPCC are prioritizing now, and the UK government more widely. So people will catch on. I think it's only going to grow from now.
That's really good to hear. And just a little shout out for us at the ODI. Corinne has done our data ethics professional certification. We run that course a couple of times a year. Our next one isn't until September. So if anyone wants to book onto that course, we've still got spaces. We'd love to have more from the police. We've got 2 people from police forces on our current cohort as well. I think they might be in the audience, so hi. So we're always happy to have more if anyone in the audience is thinking, oh, I'd like to do that too. Right, let's go back to our questions. Ooh, another question from Ed here. How do you select the participants in your public engagement? That's a really interesting question, because I think that's something that a lot of organizations struggle with. Maybe the police are in a mix of a fortunate and difficult position in that there's a lot of public scrutiny, but also who cares about what you're doing. Any thoughts on how to select those people?
So as part of our rights-based pathway process, so we are the overall owners of that process, but it does involve a lot of teamwork across the organization. So when it comes to things like public consultation and consultation with specific groups, we work very closely with our insight and engagement team, who are the real experts in that and have those connections. So we would really be led by them as to who should be involved and how it's delivered. But again, I suppose it would just be led by the specific context of the use case we were considering and what the triage had found. So it might be, for example, that in that certain groups affected more than others question, we might have identified that potentially, young people might be more adversely affected for whatever reason. That's just a random example, by the way. And therefore, the kind of engagement with the public would put them as a priority. So engage with young people specifically. So I think it would just be a combination of different factors, but we would be led by insight and engagement on that front, which is exactly why the rights-based pathway was formalized. So we have those kind of touch points to engage with other internal stakeholders.
That is something that, I know it comes from the sort of difficulties around doing policing work, and trying to get people on board. It comes from the challenges that you have, but it also means that you might have those teams in place that maybe other organizations don't, which is interesting. Now, here's a question that I knew was going to come up, and I'm really glad we've got it here. Thanks, Summer, for asking it. If the data ethics triage identified a risk, for example, with data accuracy, does the project owner have the authority to go ahead with the technology despite the risk flagged? So this is something that I've heard before. A lot of people ask this type of question, is like, what if it's advised against, but I don't know, the leadership or someone really want to do it anyway? What happens then?
Yeah. So technically they could just override our advice completely if they really wanted to. I think that would be quite a bold decision, to be honest. But yeah, it technically could happen. It hasn't happened yet. But I would say that the rights-based pathway and data ethics more generally is very well established in our organization. It's pretty high profile and it's got a lot of support from our executive and from our key partner agencies, such as our oversight body, the SPA. So I think I would like to think anyway, that it would be unlikely to happen. And also, because we do have that wider rights-based pathway process where we involve numerous different stakeholders and members of the public, if that entire process was engaged from start to finish, they wouldn't just be going against our advice as a team, they'd be going against the advice and the recommendations of all the other people that are involved in that process and all the other organizations potentially. So yeah, it would be a very bold move, I would say, but not impossible.
Extreme risk appetite for that, because
Yeah.
Corinne was making the point. I did mention that I thought this question might be asked, and Corinne made the point that the minutes of the meetings are transparent as well, so the general public would be able to see that that recommendation had been made and that they'd gone against it. So I thought that's very, brave. I liked that Police Scotland did that, to be like, we are going to publish what our boards say should happen, because that's a real accountability move right there.
Yeah,
I thought that was pretty impressive. Okay, question from Graham. Some of this technology, e.g. live facial recognition, may be using new methods to gather evidence to carry out a prosecution. Is the process and raw data shared with, for instance, defense teams and juries, or merely the interpretation delivered by the technology? That's an interesting, procedural police question.
So we're not using live face recognition yet. So we're not actually using any technology in that way that would link directly into a court result at present. I know that some other police forces, in the UK and globally might be, but as I understand it, yeah, any kind of drafts of a document that eventually is to be disclosed for court, even if it's AI generated, is disclosable. So yeah, potentially everything would be part of that process.
Good to know. And another question here from Kane. Since introducing your data ethics framework, how has ethical maturity within Police Scotland evolved? For example, becoming more human-centric or encouraging staff to stop, start, and consider ethical implications? And is there a way this maturity is measured?
I wouldn't say it's measured specifically as such. I think we've just been quite mindful over the years that we've been in business, for want of a better word, to really engage with as many people across the force as we can, and kind of just put data and data considerations on the forefront of everyone's minds. It's, if we want to become a data-driven organization, then we have to know to be able to use data responsibly. So I think it's more the wider education piece, where you gradually sort of see a change in culture over time. So I think if you look at where we started before of all this with the cyber kiosks, where we didn't really know how to go about introducing a project like that. We didn't understand the transparency and accountability requirements at that time, and I don't think many organizations would have, to be honest, because data ethics is quite a new thing. But if you fast forward to where we are now, where we're looking at live facial recognition, and before we even consider actually deploying this or starting a pilot, we've put public engagement and transparency first. So I think that kind of answers how it's been embedded in our culture, how we've improved things.
That's fantastic. And I put a link in the chat for anyone who's interested. We at the ODI have a tool that was funded by DCIT called the Data Ethics Maturity Model. So it's online. You can have a free go at it. You get one free go. Anyone can, if you make a login for our website, so DCIT can track engagement with the tool. But if you're an ODI member, you can do sort of unlimited maturity assessments. And we've got different types of maturity assessments that are in that tool, but one of them is data ethics maturity assessment. So you can actually, if you're sort of wanting to emulate what Police Scotland have done done and you're like, oh, where are we now? Where do we want to start? You can benchmark yourself with that tool. So I've put the link in the chat if anyone's interested. So that brings us to time. Thank you so much, Corinne, for all this insight. It's been absolutely wonderful to hear all the excellent work you've done. And also, thanks to everyone for all your really good questions. This was a really great discussion today. So hopefully we'll see you all at the next webinar or in one of our training sessions. And we really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Corinne.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Kate.